talk is actually on the dismantling of survivorship, right? Because we all survive something. So I'm just going to tell you my story. In 2012, I went on a yoga retreat in Ubud, Bali. 19 women from all over the United States met at the Soul Shine retreat to spend a week practicing yoga and meditating and just sort of finding themselves. Every morning we would watch the sunrise and then we would do yoga. And we were up in this open air yoga studio. And what we would see in the background were rice paddies. And the background music to our yoga practice was monks chanting, not chants monking, that would be silly. It was monks chanting in the distance. And it was an amazing experience. And when I was on my way on this 24-hour flight, I had to fly from Newark to Hong Kong, and I was in Hong Kong for 19 hours, and then I flew from Hong Kong to Bali, which was another 5-hour flight, so I had a lot of time to think. So while I was flying there, I was like, you know what, how am I gonna handle this trip, right? I don't really know anybody. I went with a friend, but she and I didn't know anybody, and I was frankly going to the other side of the planet, and I was a little nervous about that. And on my way there, I kept thinking, like, how am I gonna show up for this, right? Because I always show up in a particular way. The way I show up is I show up tough, I show up loud so everybody knows I'm in the room. I'm funny, because I think I'm the funniest person I've ever met. I really do. You'll see. You'll get to know me and you'll think I'm funny too. But the one thing I wanted to do that I didn't always do, or the one thing I didn't want to do that I always did, was I didn't want to fight anybody. Right, so I knew that this was it's 19 women doing yoga and meditating. Somebody's gonna cry, you know that, right? Somebody's gonna get like in touch with feelings and stuff. I was usually the person who made sure it wasn't me that got in touch with anything because I was not interested in that. So I chose that what I was going to do on this trip was I was going to go with the flow. And I literally pictured in my head, like, don't laugh, but I literally pictured in my head, like, I'm gonna be like water. I'm just gonna flow. Did I mention I'm a yoga teacher? I was like, I'm just gonna flow. And I was just like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So we get there, and the sun rises, and the monks are chanting, and we all go upstairs to this open air yoga studio, and we're doing yoga, and the yoga teacher says, today's class, the theme is forgiveness. Am I allowed to curse? Yeah. I was like, fuck that, I'm out. Done. No interest whatsoever in this. I'm out. Then I remembered I'm here to flow. Okay, so I did what I always do. Whenever I'm faced with any kind of confrontation or anything that scares me and makes me feel this close to anything that might resemble vulnerability, I did what I always do. I buckle down, I give in, I do what I'm told, and I sell out. But I had promised myself I wasn't going to do that. So what I did instead was I reminded myself of who I am and how I want to show up for myself. So I did something I'd never done before. I began to write a letter. She asked us to write a letter of forgiveness to someone that we knew, whether dead or alive. So as the tears fell, I turned to a page in my journal and I started writing this letter. And I wrote about people I was going to forgive. And instead of writing the crap that I always wrote, like forgiving my mother for being an alcoholic and choosing her alcohol over raising my sister and I, and instead of forgiving my father for selling my body into prostitution from the time I was 11 until I was 13, and forgiving my body for the breast cancer that I had as an adult, instead of doing all that, I just forgave myself. I forgave myself for all of the secrets that I had to hold. And as I continued writing, I began to turn a new page in my journal, and I wrote a letter to the people who raped me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't write what I thought I should. I wrote from my soul. And it was in this letter that I began to release so much of the past 20 years that I had been holding on to. For the first time, I was able to fully embrace all of the emotions with compassion and not run away. It was the first time I connected with these feelings and on my own, and not run away, not shut down, not push anyone away, and not even get sarcastic and biting. Which, by the way, I am extremely sarcastic. Like, I could win an Olympic medal. If my husband's over here, you can ask him later on. Like, seriously, I'm sarcastic. Sorry, honey. So, for the first time, I was able to sit in the discomfort of the pain and the anger. And I was surprised to find myself feeling. Literally, I was feeling. I felt lighter, I felt happier, and I even felt hungry. Usually, when I'm this close to anything that resembles vulnerability, I shut down and I feel nothing, not even hunger. And it was then it then occurred to me that I made it through, and it really wasn't so bad. I made it through that eye of the needle. This all happened in less than 10 minutes. At the end of this journaling exercise, the retreat leader came over and asked me if I was okay, and I said yes, and I really was, like I was fine. And for the first time, I was truly present to all I'd been through in my life, and the impact that it had on me. And for the first time, I really, truly realized I made it through. They didn't break me. By the way, that's a good feeling. That's a good thing. So, before that day in Bali, I was just surviving my life. I'm still nervous, in case you're wondering. Keep in mind, I grew up in a home with my sister and our mother, who was a raging alcoholic until I was 11, at which point she suggested to my father that my father lived in Florida, and she suggested to him that she was done raising us. She had had enough of both my sister and I, and it was his turn. She was done, we're out. So she gave us each a one-way plane ticket to Florida, and that's where we went. My father also was an alcoholic, by the way. So the abuse started quite soon after I moved there. And given this world that I lived in, I created these rules, right? So you have that internal dialogue, you have that conversation that goes on in your head, and when something bad happens to you, you make a decision, right? Like if you fail a test, you make a decision about yourself or about the situation or the circumstance. You get fired from a job, you make a decision about it. Your girlfriend or your boyfriend cheats on you, you make a decision, So I made these decisions about myself. And the decisions or the rules that I made about myself were that people are either safe or they're unsafe. There is no in between. The world is dangerous. I'm not worthy of being loved or protected, and I'm completely on my own. I made these choices and these decisions between the ages of 11 and 13, and I went on to live my life based on these like they were the word of God. I believed them. So these were great rules too. When I was young, they were great rules. They worked. In fact, I believe they saved my life. It was also these rules that had me call my grandmother and have her come and get me, because my grandmother was safe. My father, her son, was not. However, over time, these rules became the bricks that built the walls between me and the rest of the world. And there's this good news, bad news thing about sexual abuse in the human mind. For the person who's abused, we have this complete ability to erase it from our mind. We can erase that we can block that time period out for a period of time. And then, unfortunately, the bad news is it comes back. So, once I moved back to New Jersey, I lived with my grandparents. I proceeded to live a really good life. I was living a normal life. I lived a normal childhood. I was trying to be a good girl and a good student. And looking back, I had no memory of what happened. I just totally lost my place. Anyway, I had no memory of what happened, but I knew something was off. I knew that deep down inside, I had there was something different about me, and I had these two sets of beliefs. One set of beliefs I had was that the world was beautiful and that people were loving and kind, and it just, everything was great. That's the one set of beliefs I had. The other set of beliefs I had was that the world was dangerous and no one cared about me. No one wanted me, and I was on my own, and there was something wrong with me. I was the broken one. And I tried so hard to protect myself and the people around me from seeing the real me, so that they would not leave me as well. So I spent the next 10 or 15 years doing my best to fit in and act unsafe, and there was no in between. And I was always on the lookout for danger. And I was great at starting relationships and getting jobs. Keeping them was the problem. Because as soon as I deemed someone unsafe, and there wasn't any like particular thing that someone did or didn't do or whatever, but as soon as I deemed them unsafe, you were done, you were out. I would cut you out of my life without another word about it. Some people would look at that and go, wow, you're really strong, you just walk away like that. I call it being a coward. I call it being someone who can't stay in a relationship. I'm not ashamed of it, but it's just where I was in my life, and that's what got me through. So there were things like within moments of walking into a restaurant, I could point out every man in that room that I deemed unsafe. I would know where they were the entire time I was in the restaurant. If they got up to go use the men's room, I didn't leave my seat until they came back. And when they did come back, if I went to use the bathroom, I was very careful. I knew exactly where they were. I walked on the other side of the restaurant. Like I had it all planned out in my head, which is kind of exhausting when you're trying to enjoy yourself. I did go on to marry a wonderful man. We have 2 children. My first is my son. I was over the moon with him. I couldn't believe my luck to have given birth to the most perfect and beautiful boy on the planet. No offense, guys, you're all really adorable. Just saying. Then 3 years later, I became pregnant again, this time with my daughter. Same goes, she's beautiful, I think we're all beautiful. And I was frightened throughout the whole pregnancy with my daughter. But once I gave birth, I was so nervous, and I couldn't seem to get that same excitement or that same bond that I had with my son. I was anxious and in constant fear that something would happen to her. And 2 months after she was born, I began having these mental images that were violent and scary, and they were terrible images of a young girl being abused. And I truly had no idea what was going on. I never noticed that the girl I was having these images of was me as a child. I didn't see it. I thought I had postpartum depression. I called a therapist because I thought if I have a chat with a therapist, I can just work it out, it'll be fine. That chat ended up to be 2 sessions a week for 18 months. And during that time, the memories came flooding back. Well, truthfully, the memories all came flooding back in about a month period, which was not pleasant. And I was really shocked to learn, this sounds so silly saying it out loud, I was shocked to learn that I was abused. Like shocked. Like, what? That me? Are you kidding me? And I had no recollection of it. And even my therapist was shocked at the amount and the degree to which I was able to sort of suppress these memories. And when they came up, they came up. So just like our former speaker was saying, if you feel something, you gotta tell somebody, find somebody to tell, because it's coming out either way. So it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but it's coming out. And I'm not saying that to scare you. At the end of the night, you'll have a handout from me with my contact information. If you've been through anything and you need somebody to talk to, you call me, we'll figure it out. So that's done. You've got somebody to call now, it'll be completely confidential. So that's one part of it handled. So I went on for the next 5 years processing and dealing with the anger, the upset, the fear, and the frustration, and the profound sadness that comes with being a survivor of childhood abuse. Fast forward to my 40th birthday, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Yay! Happy birthday! So at this point, you might be thinking my life sounds like a bad country western song, but stick with me, it has a much better ending than the beginning. I wasn't supposed to get cancer, but here it was, something I can't block out, something I have to deal with in the present moment. On the way to the first of countless doctor visits, I remember commenting to my husband, this can't be for nothing, there has to be a reason for this. Cancer taught me that someday is a myth. I didn't want to die with a heart filled with resentment. I wanted and I needed to experience peace. Peace in my heart and peace in my soul. And I had to put the past in the past once and for all. The intention of rehabilitating my post-treatment from cancer body brought me to yoga. Practicing yoga brought me to peace. Yoga taught me how to observe my thoughts without judgment and quiet my internal conversation. I replaced my judgments with compassion. which was really a new one for me because to this day, I'm still very judgmental. I have to really work on that. It's a constant thing that I'm working on. And I began to notice how I talked to myself, and I was mean. And I would never speak to my children the way I spoke to myself. So I knew that had to change too. And once I started paying attention to my thoughts and my actions, it was clear to me that I could dismantle every belief that I had created as a child. Instead of calling myself stupid when I forgot something, I offered myself compassion. When the safe or unsafe thoughts appeared, I would pause and I would check in. Is this real, or is this something from my past coming up that I need to deal with? I even became accountable for my sarcastic, biting remarks. I still curse like a sailor, but nobody's perfect. So I learned how to apologize and ask for an apology. And I learned how to allow the people in my life to love and protect each other. Healing trauma is not a one and done event. I continue to experience triggers and flashbacks. I now know how my body reacts to them, and I'm present to the physical sensations. I'm present to my thoughts, so now when thoughts about my old rules appear, I can observe them, and I can choose how to consciously respond rather than unconsciously react. For instance, last summer, honey, I didn't tell you I was going to say this, so if you don't want to listen. Last summer, my husband surprised me with a trip to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary to my favorite place, Santa Monica, California. While we were flying to California, I knew something was off. Excuse me. By the time we arrived in Santa Monica, I was anxious and sullen. When my husband tried to touch me, I recoiled. He asked me what was wrong. I told him I needed a minute to figure it out. I went and sat alone for a moment just to let myself be present to my emotions. I realized I was not in control. I didn't plan this trip. I didn't know what was happening next. He wouldn't even let me pick, like, the Uber car thing, how there's a bunch in the air. He wouldn't even let me pick that one, so I was in no control of anything. I'm in control of too, this week. Once I dismantled my thoughts and my feelings, I realized that I'm with the safest, most loving man I've ever met. I went and told him how I was feeling, and he got it. His reply was, okay. And that was it. There was no speech, no long drawn out conversation, no drama, no tears. He got me. And in that moment, I was able to let it go and go on and have a spectacular trip with my husband. And over the years, I've gone from being a person who was always on the lookout for danger to being a person who's of service to others. I learned that I do have something to contribute. I'm not what happened to me. I get to choose my life, I get to choose how it will unfold, and I get to choose to be safe in the process. If you asked me a few years ago what type of work I'd be doing today, I would not have said teaching yoga in drug and alcohol recovery centers, teaching yoga in the schools and communities throughout Newark, teaching yoga in prison, actually in 2 prisons now, teaching yoga for veterans as well. But that's exactly what I do. And I'm not telling you this to share my resume. I'm telling you this because the work that I'm doing is a living example. I want to get this right, hold on. It's a living example of the result of the dismantling the belief systems that no longer serve me. By dismantling my beliefs, I made a new life for myself. I was able to find and share my contribution to the world. Finally, I'd like to share a poem with you by a man called Patrick Overton. I believe this poem sums up what it takes to dismantle the conversation of what it is to be a survivor. When you walk to the edge of all of the life that you have, and you take that first step into the darkness of the unknown, you must believe that one of 2 things will happen. There will be something solid for you to land on, or you will be taught to fly. Thank you.